everything you ever want to know about annuities and more.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Yeah, so this one I think is an interesting one, Brian, because annuities it's a polarizing word out there in the financial industry. When you even start throwing it out there, either people's ears kind of perk up or they immediately turn a 180 and move in the opposite direction as fast as they can.
Well, I mean, there's several things going on. We talked about this in pre-show planning. I don't tell people when I meet new neighbors or even people, if you go to like an entrepreneur luncheon or something like that, they say, what do you do for a living? I always pause because I never know what to say, because when you tell somebody you're a financial planner, they naturally social distance from you because they assume it's a matter of time before you either pitch them a life insurance policy, an annuity, and that's so unfortunate to me that that's become synonymous with what financial planners use in their toolbox. So we want to kind of explain, because here's what's going on, Bo. We've gone through a weird time. I mean, because we've had stock markets that have crashed. We've had all of us go under where we're essentially locked down in our house nationwide. I mean, really worldwide. So these are things that you haven't seen. So it's very realistic that fear is peaking now to levels we have not seen. And typically when you start having fear elements, panic, that's when the insurance guys come out and start pitching guarantees or, lack of volatility, all the type of things. So I wanted, and look, we're going to try to do this in a way that even if you're an insurance person, you'll watch it and go, yeah, hey, they at least laid out the way things really work and when's the good times to use these type of products, but what's the reality and what's not necessarily in the sales brochure.
The thing we want to equip you with today is if fear is at an all-time high. It means that the folks are going to be out ready to start pitching you. So likely, if you haven't heard it yet, you'll start hearing it. All we want to do is equip you with the right vocabulary, the right knowledge, so that you can approach those decisions well. Now, I do feel like we have to put a disclaimer out there, because every time we ever do a show covering a specific investment product or type of products, the haters come out of the woodworks. We are not saying in this show that all annuities are bad, or that all annuity salesmen are bad, or that all insurance is bad. Do not mishear us. We're just going to try to lay out the facts of what you need to know, the different types of products and how they work. Fair enough? Fair enough.
Yeah, but I'll be the Simon Cowell here and share that, unfortunately, the lion's share of people that are being put into annuities don't fit completely. So let's jump into this and let's go a little deeper. So basically, there are two types of annuities. There's your fixed annuities, and then there's your investment annuities. And I want to kind of do a deeper dive into each one of those topics. And first, we had fixed annuities, Bo. So give us an overview of what we're talking about when we say fixed annuities.
Yeah, so when you think about a fixed annuity, there are really two main varieties that we're going to touch on. There are immediate fixed annuities, which essentially says I'm going to trade a lump sum of cash today for an income stream. Essentially, I'm going to take X dollars, and I'm going to start receiving an income stream for that. Or the second variety of fixed annuity is a deferred fixed annuity, where essentially I'm going to take that chunk of money and I'm going to put it somewhere, and it's going to earn a guaranteed stated rate of return over some special period. So it's not creating income for me yet. It actually is a growth mechanism with a fixed rate over a fixed period.
So when we see the words fixed, we know we're either talking about a cash stream, or, essentially paying you income for a stated period of time, or we're talking about a guaranteed rate of return. So that's when we're talking about fixed. So let's jump into immediate fixed annuities, because what I think is interesting about these, we don't see as many pensions, but if you really boil down what is a pension, it really is an immediate fixed annuity, because what it is promising you is it's somewhere there is a basket of holdings that is getting handed over to an insurance company or a pension administrator, where they're saying for the rest of your life or for a stated period of time, they're going to pay you this level of income for that stated period.
Yeah, and a lot of times if you're someone who's approaching retirement or you've recently gone through retirement, you probably recognize that you had a choice. You could either receive that lump sum, that big check that you would be in charge of managing for the rest of your life, or you could receive that income stream. You're essentially making the decision to annuitize those dollars or to not annuitize those dollars.
Yeah, and this one's useful. Like I said, if you wanted to have a personal pension, maybe you didn't work for a company that had a pension, this is probably the cleanest way to create your own personal pension situation.
Exactly right.
And then deferred fixed annuities, Bo, you kind of laid this out. This is where you're basically saying for a stated period of time, we're going to have a guarantee interest rate or rate of return. And what we found, just to kind of let everybody know a temperature of the market right now, they're paying between 2.5% to 3.5%. The difference on a deferred fixed annuity is that 2.5 is like a 5-year.
Sure.
You know, anything 2 to 3, 4 years guaranteed on that term. And then if you see something that's paying 3.5%, that's you have to go out as far as 10 years.
Yeah, we were talking with Matt, doing some pre-show prep, and he said, really, when you think about a deferred fixed annuity, it's a lot kind of like a CD. If you think about the way a CD at a bank works, it's very, very similar. The reason that most people would opt for an annuity over a certificate of deposit is the rate tends to be slightly higher.
Now, and most people aren't getting excited about 2 to 3%,
Sure.
especially when you come out of the year like 2019, where the markets, even conservative portfolios made double digits. But all of a sudden we go through a bear market and you're like, wait a minute, guaranteed. You start getting excited about that. So that's why these products come out when people start getting nervous. They realize that markets do have volatility. Typically 2 out of every 10 years, you're going to have downturns. And people realize, I don't really like that. So they kind of jump into it. So I want to kind of talk about what's left out of the sales presentation. What are the risks of fixed annuities?
Yeah, so, when you hear things like guarantees, just like you said, people get excited, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some things you need to be aware of.
I think this is the part with insurance that I want to make sure people understand. I think insurance design is made up of, they say, okay, what are things that from a component of human nature that people are scared of, and how can we create a product that kind of checks the boxes
that addresses those concerns.
And so when you come through fearful times, like we just came through this pandemic, people say, man, guaranteed sounds really good.
Sure.
So the insurance company has to figure out how do they design a product that is guaranteed. Typically when they do that, when you're willing, because guarantee is a slow poison to long-term returns. Risk and reward go in the same boat together.
That's right.
So when you say the word guarantee, it doesn't fit naturally with that because you're losing all of the risk element, which equates to return. So you're giving up a lot. So there are definitely some limitations when we talk about it. So let's talk about some of these limitations because it's not only on rated return, it's also inflation.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the biggest risks that we see with fixed rate annuities, where you have this guaranteed low interest rate, is inflation. The cost of goods rising over time could potentially be greater than the return those dollars are earning. And so we just said, let's look at a quick study of how prices have changed. And we went and looked at 3 common goods. We looked at a gallon of milk, we looked at a new house, and we looked at a new car. And the price those things were in 1970, when some of us were around, and then looking all the way to today.
I wasn't around in 1970.
You were getting close.
I was close.
You were getting close.
My parents, I don't even know if they knew each other in 1970, but it is one of those things. What's funny is I look at these prices, like gallon of milk. Okay, that is what it is. But house, my parents' houses they built in 1978. I was 5 years old when we moved. I still remember they built that house for $60,000. That's still the house my mom lives in. What I think is interesting is then you look at the new car. I still remember in the sometimes 76, 78, somewhere in there, my parents bought an Oldsmobile for around $2 to $3 grand. So that was probably somewhere in those low 70s. So because you can see a new car was $3,500. What I find interesting is that new cars cost more than what houses cost in 1970.
It's insane. And so why does this matter? Most of us, when we enter into retirement or when we think about long-term planning, we're planning for a 20, 30, 40-year time horizon. Well, if we only plan for what things cost today and we're not thinking about what things cost 20 or 30 years in the future, there's a really good chance that we could, cut ourselves off by not having the resources necessary.
Well, I mean, interest rates are in the basement right now. And it's one of those things where I think if you locked in for an extended period of time, you really could get yourself in a pickle of a situation because it is no doubt that $1 today 30 years from now probably is only the equivalent of 30 cents because the purchasing power will go down over time. So you definitely need to be aware of inflation and what that means, especially when you're in such a low interest rate environment right now. And that leads to kind of the next thing that we talk about is legacy is limited.
Yeah, so one of the things that often especially if you have children or family members, one of the things you really think about is I want to make sure that I leave a legacy for my kids. So I want to build up to financial independence so they can provide for me over that 20, 30, 40-year financial independence period. But then I'd like to have something that I leave behind to the next generation. Yeah. Most people kind of have that thought. With annuities, you don't always get to do that thing.
Well, and it's the big part. This is the thing. We looked at it. Because you can go to websites and type in like immediate annuities, sure, and you see it. Because a lot of us, if you could daydream about what you want, we'd all love to have a pension, but they've gone extinct. You just don't see as many pensions as you used to unless you work for a government entity.
Right.
But so we all look and we're like, man, it would be great if I could stack my Social Security plus a pension. So then you have the thought, well, I'll just go create my own pension system. And when you look, and here's something I want people to understand. Cash flow or payout rate is not the same thing as a safe withdrawal rate. And you can go, because we did this for show prep. If you went right now and looked for a 65-year-old male, what the, guaranteed for life, what your payout would be on an immediate annuity, it has a stated cash flow or payout rate that is like 5.9%.
And so immediately when you hear that, you're like, whoa, 5.9% guaranteed. Sign me up all day long. Why wouldn't I want to have that in my portfolio?
But it's playing a little bit of a mind trick on you because, like I said, we're so used to you. If you've watched enough shows, we talk about when you're trying to build up your financial assets so that when you get to retirement, you can pull out between 3.5% to 6%, depending upon what age you retire. You can pull out, that's called a safe withdrawal rate, with the thought that you'll live off the money the portfolio is generating, but then when you pass away, there's probably going to be a large portion of that principal that you'll pass on to your heirs. So when you hear that there's a cash flow or payout rate of 5.9%, it immediately ding, 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 ding. That's on the high end of where the safe withdrawal rate was. But there's a catch, because let's take that same example, the 65-year-old. Realistically, they're probably going to live. I just did a quick calculation with the financial calculator to age 85. Okay. Even if you don't pass away at age 85, your living expenses go down significantly once you get into your later 80s anyway.
Sure.
So if you take that 20-year period, all of a sudden that 5.9%, once you take into account the principal that's also being degraded, because once you pass away, this is why we say it's legacy risk. Once you pass away, your heirs don't get this money. This goes to the insurance company. That's the deal you make with them, that you give them this chunk of money. They give you this cash flow for the rest of your life, but then after that, it kind of goes away. Mm-hmm. Once you take into account that principal degradation, that rate of return of 5.9, which sounds like a really good safe withdrawal rate, goes down to 1.7%, because realize that 5.9 is primarily made up of you spending the money you'd save.
You're essentially getting your principal paid back to you. Now, before you guys start writing, so yeah, you can go buy life insurance riders or things like that to protect the value of the annuity, but then you're only really doing two things. You're either increasing the cost of the product or you're lowering that rate of return, the inherent rate of return you have. So I don't know that that's the best solution if legacy building is something that's on your list of goals to do.
But that's ultimately where the two sides of this discussion go, is because most people say, I want guaranteed safety. But then when you ask them several questions, they're like, so you're okay with not leaving anything to the kiddos? And they're like, no, I want to leave something over here to the kiddos. And you're like, well, those two don't go well together. So they're definitely in conflict with each other. So be aware of that, because those are the biggest concerns with the fixed annuities, is that you are going to see some inflation risk. You're also going to see some legacy risk. And those things go into play. But I want to pivot now, because more than likely, when I talked about insurance people, when you hear somebody's a financial planner, you always naturally social distance yourself, because you know they're going to start pitching you stuff. They're not pitching immediate annuities. They're not pitching fixed deferred annuities. Nope. They're pitching an investment annuity. And Bo, give them the sales spiel. What do people typically say when they go and they pitch an investment annuity?
This is an exciting opportunity for tax-deferred growth. You can actually legally hide money from the government inside of annuity structure. You don't have to do the 401k. You don't have to do the 403b. You can actually set up your own tax-deferred vehicle, and you can allow it to grow into the future and not pay any tax on it. Sounds pretty good,
yeah,
right?
Because, well, it also, once again, remember, when insurance products are designed, they appeal to some type of central thing to being human that we like. Well, we know on the fixed side, we like guarantees.
Yep.
Safety is good. But we also, on the other side, We like growth. Remember that whole fear and greed?
Yeah.
Fear and greed are the two just components that we're always fighting, and they're in battle with each other. So we've got the fear taken care of with the fixed annuities. That greed part is what comes in over here. So we know investing is naturally something that we ought to be doing with our money. We ought to make our army of dollar bills do something for us. So it's not uncommon that we have a product that's put together that should mimic these things. And then what gets them in trouble is that they usually, the promise is very simple, but when you look under the hood, they get very complicated on the fees, the structures. And I kind of want to walk through, because you said something. Tax deferred growth is how they say you get the best of both worlds. You're not going to pay any income taxes on the growth. And it's also, you're going to get investment products. When I hear that, I'm like, wait a minute.
Sounds familiar.
That
I've heard that somewhere.
Really familiar. And what it is what is the largest asset class that most people have when they talk about their investments? When people cross into seven-figure millionaire status, it usually happens first with their retirement accounts,
exactly
meaning
right.
like 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, all those things have tax benefits. But guess what? And look, if you were trying to do a financial order of operation on where investment annuities fit into it, it would be after you maximized your 401k, after you maximized all of your IRA savings options, including Roth IRAs. That's when you would even consider this, because you're going to find out these things by their sheer design are somewhat expensive. They have complexity. So all that stuff comes into play. So don't even consider this unless you're first checking the box on paying yourself first and saving in those retirement accounts.
So personal finance checkpoint number one, if you are someone who's thinking about investing in an investment annuity, you have to ask yourself your question, have I exhausted all other tax-deferred saving vehicles? Am I maxing out my 401k? Not just getting the employer match. Am I actually hitting the IRS limit max? Am I maxing my IRAs? Only after that point should you begin to think about looking at investment annuities. Now, this is a quick, and I don't want to go into too much of a side here, but we talk about this. One of the most frustrating things that we see is when a new prospect comes to us, a new client wants to start working with us, we look at their investment portfolio and we start seeing annuities housed inside of IRAs, inside of an IRA rollover, or inside of a Roth IRA.
I mean, that's almost unmentionable. I mean, and here's the real, why does that upset us? Why does that make the hair on our arm stand up? Is that the design, the legislation that created 401ks, 403bs, 457s, and IRAs, the design of the legislation that the government put together to give these things tax-favored status is automatically free granted to them, meaning that you didn't have to pay extra to put an insurance product or anything. They're just by their sheer design and the way that it was written into law, you get to have this benefit. So when you stack an insurance product like an annuity inside of a already by its sheer creation tax-deferred product, you're double paying for something you shouldn't have to, for the benefit that's already just innately been given to this savings vehicle. So when you do that, you know you're overpaying for something that was already inherently given. And then, as Bo has said, it's almost like a cuss word around here, and we have seen it, unfortunately. If you're putting if you're putting annuity products inside of a Roth IRA, which grows tax-free, that's a travesty. I mean, it turns my stomach just even thinking about it. But you see this type of stuff, and it gives me all kind of heartburn.
So maybe you just heard that, and you're like, "Oh no, I'm one of those people. I have an annuity inside of an IRA, or I have an annuity inside of a Roth." Here's one silver lining that we have found. Generally speaking, once you get past the surrender period, we'll talk about surrender periods in a second. It is a little bit easier to exit annuities if they're inside of the IRA structure. So if you have one that you've had, it's much less costly from a tax perspective to surrender that annuity inside of the IRA than if you were to do it outside of the IRA. So again, you have some options there, likely, but if you can avoid it, you want to make sure that you avoid that.
Yeah, and you can unwind them. I mean, we're going to talk about it later in the show. If you have been sold one of these products, you're going to have to, unfortunately, figure out where you are. We'll get into the fee structure in a minute, but where you are in the sales and the deferred sales charges and other things. There is some plans of actions you can do to fix the wrong that was done. But last thing, just before I move on to the two different types of investment annuities, is that realize financial order of operations. I know I've already mentioned this once, but you got to respect the foo and make sure you are maxing out, not just maximizing the match, maxing out exactly what Bo said earlier. You're fully filling up those retirement accounts before you even consider something like this.
Love it.
So let's go a little deeper and let's talk about now investment annuities in general, because there's two type of investment annuities that you're going to have your brother-in-law and others, you maybe a neighbor pitch you. Let's kind of go ahead and educate you on what those are.
Yeah, so the two we're going to focus on are, one, the variable annuity, just a regular variable annuity, and then the other that we've seen more prevalence on in the last 10 to 15 years are what are known as equity indexed annuities. Both of these are pitched with tax-deferred growth, market participation, and then likely some sort of potential for limited downside risk. That's the way these things get sold.
So, and Bo's exactly right. So when you talk about like a variable annuity, it's going to be, what's crazy is that it has sub-accounts, which look very similar to mutual funds. They have a lot of the components of, I've even seen where you might have a brand name to it that you think you're buying into this investment, but it's actually a sub-account where it's got additional layers of fees on top of it. But it does look very similar to a mutual fund, but there's some things that are left out of the sales presentation. Let's kind of cover, what that is that these things can be expensive. And they also, I can tell you, because we had this discussion.
I was going to say a pre-show prep on this one.
This came up is that they can be a headache for your kids, because these things, when you inherit annuities, it's a little different. It's not as easy as some of the other things that you can pass on to the kids, the legacy.
People so often get caught up in this idea of, oh, well, I really like tax-deferred growth, tax-deferred growth, tax-deferred growth, which is true. We love tax-deferred growth. That's why it's higher up on the FOO. But there's nothing wrong with growing assets inside of an after-tax account, because we do know once they've been held long-term, even they are subject to long-term capital gains rates. But from a legacy planning perspective, one of the beautiful things that's available to after-tax assets is you do get a step up in basis for your heir. So if you have a taxable account that you had $500,000 in, and when you pass away, it's worth $1 million, all of that gain gets evaporated if your heirs inherit that, because it gets that step up in basis.
So and we'll talk about that with the negatives in a minute, but no doubt we talk about tax diversification all the time. It's okay to have a basket of after-tax money. That's your taxable savings. Tax deferred, like your 401ks, your IRAs, and then tax free, which are your Roth holdings. You want to kind of have a nice, healthy mix of all those things. But that's variable annuities. They look like mutual funds. They just have some expenses that we'll get into in a minute, but they try to mimic a lot of the investment components. And that leads to the second one, which is the other investment annuity, is equity indexed annuities.
Now, Brian, I've heard you explain these 1,000 times over the years, and one of the best ways I've heard you explain it is like a ratchet. And what's so funny, Ruby, I think I mentioned this show prep, I've never actually seen you explain it without doing the arm motion, and so I feel like explain how an equity indexed annuity works, but you got to do the arm motion.
Well, this is not my design, because this is the way it's pitched. The reason I know about this is because I've had prospects
pitch this.
Yeah, by the way, we have rescued. I don't know if you remember, big case. This is years and years and years ago, is that a 401k, a person inherited a very close to seven-figure portfolio. It was right below it. It was like $800,000. Met at their favorite breakfast restaurant, an insurance agent that put her into an equity index annuity. And I was like, what? Unfortunately, we were within the halo period of the state of Georgia has a look-back buying period. We were able to unwind it because, like I said, this was a 401k, already tax-deferred, tax-favored, that she rolled into an IRA and then bought into this product. It was a bad deal, but the way it was pitched to her was that this thing's going to invest just like you did in your deceased husband's 401k, where it's like a ratchet. It can always go up, but it can't go down. There's no negative. You can't lose money with this type of investment.
And again, as investors who recognize fear and greed, what is better than an investment that only goes up and protects you when you go down? That sounds like the absolute best thing
tied to the market. I mean, you're telling me this thing's going to be tied to the S&P 500? Woo! How to get me in there? I want some of this. So, but when somebody guarantees or they protect you, there has to be a trade-off.
Exactly
There's no free lunch. there's a reason we tell you when you invest, don't invest anything in the financial markets that you can't be a long-term investor. 5 to 7 years is how long you have to be willing to let that money work. Well, guess what? Insurance companies know that rule as well. So that's why what they do is the way they can offer you these guarantees and these protections is they will control your behavior. They will put a surrender period on here that could last 10 years, 12 years. 15 years. So let's kind of break into how these things and the limitations of an equity indexed annuity.
Yeah, so the very first one, Brian, you just hit it. High surrender charges and cancellation fees. They control your behavior. They say, hey, sign on the dotted line and you're going to get this great thing. But if you want your money in the next 7, 10, 12, 15 years, you cannot touch it or you got to pay the piper.
Yeah. So, that's a big catch. That's a big, if that can control your behavior. Think about if I could have a client come in and I say, look, you give me this, because we can't use the word guarantee. But I tell people, historically, if you can leave the investments alone for 5 to 7 years, we'll make it through the downturns, but I can't guarantee it. These guys can guarantee it because they're locking you down for 10 years. And there hasn't been a time that the market's been invested on like a 60-40 diversified portfolio that there's not a decade that you really lose money.
That's exactly
so that's
right.
how they can make promises like that.
The next one is this is what I don't mean to laugh. High commission fees. So oftentimes with these types of products, they are incredibly lucrative for the person selling it.
That case I told you about, this is many years ago, but it was a 401k that was inherited, rolled into an IRA, put into an equity index annuity. I found out later that the commission on that product was 8%. So you think about somebody who has $800,000 invested, 8% commission. I'm sure that guy, he definitely
cuss
he
your
had
name
a tear in his beer after I pulled that commission back, because that's crazy how high the commissions are on some of these products.
The next limitation that we see is that we have expenses of the underlying investments that they can be low-ish, some around 0.5%, but some can even be greater than 2%. And this is on an annualized, ongoing basis, not that initial commission. These are ongoing expenses inside the underlying sub-accounts.
Well, it's the structure. The way they will pay themselves these high expenses is they'll be built into the participation rate, the cap rate, because you won't see an actual cost on these equity index annuities. It's primarily going to be through the underperformance of the limitations that they build into the asterisk, and we'll explain more on that in just a second.
And you actually just hit that. Your return typically can't go below 0. That's that ratchet that they protect, but it's capped usually. Or we'll talk about a few different ways that they manipulate your return to where you can only make, 3, 7%. Well, if you've ever watched our shows where we talk about what the market does, if you look at it on like a year-by-year basis, it's like up here, down here, up here, down here, up here, down here. But the average is fairly consistent over long periods of time. It just doesn't hit that average quite often. Well, if you are capping it at 0, that's great, but you're also losing a lot of that upside. So maybe what you're giving up might not be worth it.
Well, a lot of people now see that part. You can't go below 0%, so can I not lose money on these investments? Yes, you can lose money, because what happens if you had a medical issue? Now, a lot of these products will be written where you can get access to 5% per year, potentially, but you might forfeit some bonuses and other things if you do that. But it's still, they're going to limit your behavior. And if you do pull out above what they allow you to pull out in a year, typically like 5%, you're going to pay a large surrender fee that you can actually lose money on these investments when you take into account the surrender fee.
Now, one of the things that as we were kind of diving into this, that I think was a little interesting, these fees are, these products are so easy to explain when you talk about the ratchet. But the way that they actually, and I'm going to use the word manipulate your return, is far from simple. It's not exactly easy. So we wanted to explain some vocabulary for you guys to be aware of, to understand, okay, if I'm being pitched a product, what does that thing actually mean? How are they affecting the performance that I can truly earn inside of these products?
Well, and I think there's a clue in how they're designed too, is realize when we're talking about equity index annuities, these are not products that are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, because they're not necessarily buying the S&P 500.
Right.
The dirty little secret that most people don't talk about, these things are regulated by your insurance commissioner, not the SEC. And then they perform, after we go through this list of all the fees and limitations, you'll find out they perform more like a fixed income guaranteed type product than they do the equity that they're tied to.
Exactly
That's
right.
more of a marketing ploy than it is on an actual performance, and we'll explain more.
So the first one is just a cap. This is exactly what it sounds like. There's an upper limit on the return you can experience over a period of time. So, hey, yeah, you get market performance up until 7%.
Yeah.
And then you don't get any more. Pretty straightforward. The next one is a participation rate. This is you get a percentage of the index's return credited to your annuity. So maybe you get 60% of the return. So if the market makes 10%, you only make 6%.
So what I think is interesting, because a lot of people are watching this and go, okay, so it must be an either or. So I either get 7% cap, or I get 80% participation. So those years that like last year where the stock market's up well over 20%, you're thinking, okay, well that means that product will be capped at 7%. But if it's participation, maybe I just want the one that has participation. It's 80% of 20. Wow, that'd be great. No, these things are stacked. So what happens is, think about this. If you had a cap of 7%, but then a participation of 80%, they stack these things on top of each other. You'll have a year like we had last year where the market makes over 20%, and you're going to look at your return and go, that doesn't look anything like what happened with the stock market, because I hit the cap and the participation rate got employed. And then there's another fee, the spread margin asset fee. Some products are written where they'll say, we're automatically every year going to take 3% off of the performance of whatever index is listed. These things get stacked on top of each other. And here's the other thing that's a dirty little secret. You would think, okay, if they get crushed on something, if we hit a downturn, can they change the rules after they've already designed this product? The answer is yes.
Absolutely.
All they have to do is they can go to the state insurance commissioner. It's easy for them to change the participation rates and other things after you've already had the contract written, which is usually not the greatest thing when you're talking about negotiations, when somebody has all the cards and you're left holding the bag with what's left over.
This next one, this one kind of frustrates me, because what I found in my experience, this is the hardest one to end up explaining to clients or potential clients, is this bonus. It's a percentage of the first year premiums received that's added to the contract value. So let's say that you buy a $100,000 equity indexed annuity. Well, they
put a sweetener in there.
I'm going to go ahead and give you a 10% bonus, so it's actually worth $110,000. Yeah. Well, what they don't tell you is it's actually, in most cases, only worth that if you annuitize that benefit at some point in the future. You don't ever actually get that money back, at least from the policies that I've looked at the most. It's not really real. It's another one of those things that handcuffs you to where you feel like you can't get out of the product.
They usually have a vesting schedule, and the vesting schedule typically will be even longer than the surrender period. And you've already heard us talk about surrender periods can be 7 to 15 years. So if they put a vesting schedule on these bonuses, you have to look, once again, it's great from the marketing as you hear, I'm going to get a guaranteed 10% sweetener stacked on top of this as a bonus. But then when you find out that's extended over the life of this product and it's got a huge vesting period, like, that's not as good. I mean, if you start dividing that by the years that I have to keep this, all of a sudden, I mean, and when you take that into coordination with the caps and the participation rate, you realize it's not really sweetening the deal as much as you thought, but it sounded good emotionally when you first heard the sales pitch.
And then the last one are just riders. These are extra features that can be added to an annuity for additional costs. So you can have life insurance riders or cost of living riders or fill in the blank. Once again, they do one of two things. They either increase the cost of the product or they decrease your potential return.
So I know a lot of our audience is probably listening and go, man, these guys, they're sounding more like professors, textbook salesmen than they are the typical entertaining guys they are. So can they at least show me something? So can I get an illustration so that I'm not just going off of these tables? When we have slides with tables and lines and columns and rows, you're like, oh gosh, this is just like I'm in high school again or college. No, we want to show you, we actually put together an illustration to kind of teach this in a way that actually visually I think will make more sense. So
let's see how they actually stack up. Let's see how equity indexed annuities stack up to index funds. So let's assume you bought an equity indexed annuity in 1990 that just tracks the S&P 500 biggest companies in the United States. And let's say that particular product has a cap of 7%, right? Cap is usually somewhere between 3 to 7, but let's be generous, say it has a cap of 7, but you can't go below 0. So dot-com bubble bursts, don't go below 0. Great Recession, don't go below 0. COVID-19, don't go below 0.
But here's something we didn't even put in there because I want people to know we tried to give the benefit of the doubt here. We put it at 7%, which is pretty generous. You don't see any participation rate. Remember, these things get stacked on top of each other. The fees get stacked. We didn't even put participation rate in there.
Yep.
We're just going to assume you get that first 7% is all yours to keep, even though we know in Reelsvilles, that's not actually how things work.
Reelsville?
Realville.
Another T-shirt. Put that one on the list. I love it. We live in Realville.
Yeah,
I love it. So let's actually look at what the numbers look like. Okay, so the blue line on the chart, and if you're out there listening on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, we're actually just showing the performance of the S&P. And just like we said, it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Some years it's as high as 30%.
Looks like an EKG.
Yeah, it actually does look exactly like an EKG. Well, in the middle, that kind of orange-ish line, yeah, it goes up to as high as 7, but it never goes below 0. So it's a nice steady band through time. So it's a much smoother walk. You're getting rid of the large palpitations of the S&P 500.
And realize, once again, this is an annuity that the Money Guy team designed that has not half of the limitations that you see typically with a normal product design, but we just wanted to use this as a teachable illustration.
So the question is, all right, well, which one came out better? Because, Brian, I don't know about you, but when I look at that .coms, annuities looking pretty good.
Well, look at the Great Recession. I mean, that thing, it fell off a cliff.
Yep.
I mean, you look at those returns and you're like, wow. And by the way, this is, diversified investing. You're not just buying the S&P 500. You're doing like probably a 60-40 or some type of diversification mix. But this does make a great example. It's hard to tell what the long-term performance is when you just look at the ups and downs of that S&P 500 EKG there.
So when we actually look at this, what's that, 20-year period, 19-year period? Nope, that's bad math. 30-year period.
Horrible math. That's 20
Tens
times
and
30
zeros.
years.
Not my jam. All right, 30-year period, right? So we're talking about a long time period. On average, the annualized return of the S&P 500, 9.96%. How much did the guaranteed safety of that equity index annuity cost you? The annualized return was only 4.9% over that 30-year period.
But wait, there's more. I mean, this is the thing, because realize we didn't put participation rate in there. But there's another catch that people don't talk about when they're selling equity index annuities, is that dividends make up a large portion of your long-term performance when you're buying into the equity marketplace. Dividends, come from, you think about all the big companies, a lot of them issue dividends to their investors. Those get reinvested. When they get reinvested, that's essentially sweetening up the long-term performance. Well, there's actually been research on that. And this is not just picking on the equity index. It's just thinking about how powerful are dividends to your long-term performance. Fidelity actually did some research on this. They looked at a period, this was for 20 years. They said, okay, now realize this ended as of 2018, so it does not have the outsized performance of 2019. It does not have the volatility of 2020 with the COVID-19, but this does show you kind of an interesting thing here is that the 20 years as of December 31st, end of 2018, Fidelity found that it was $21,577 is the S&P 500 return without dividends. And then if you look at it with total returns, meaning with dividends, the number bounces up to $31,000.
So, Brian, I'm confused. We were just talking about equity index annuities, and then you went on the sidebar where you're talking about dividends. Connect those two dots for me.
Well, equity index annuities just go off of price changes, and it depends upon how your contract's written. Some look at them from month to month price changes. There's also annual price changes. It all depends upon how the contract was written, but they don't take into account dividends. It's only the price changes of the index that they're saying that they're tied to. And that's what I think there's a little asterisk down at the bottom of this slide, and this is an important point too. This is not only just a recent effect. If you look at this, since 1930, dividends have made up approximately 40% of the S&P 500's average annual total return. So if you're just going off price changes, no matter whether you're looking at monthly, annually, you're still shortchanging yourself on a lot of the long-term performance here. So that leads to, because we kind of picked on equity index annuities, but let's kind of bring it back to talk about what are the risks associated with all investment annuities?
Yeah, so the first one we've already talked about, you lose a little bit of your flexibility. Most annuity products that you see have some sort of surrender charge. So if you want to take that money and change and go buy a house or do whatever, oftentimes you're going to be locked up for a surrender period amount of time. You lose the flexibility of what you actually get to do with your dollars.
So exactly what you're talking about. You're on lockdown.
Yep.
Typically, you could have fees as high as 10%.
Yep.
And 7 to 15 years. Think about that. You have a medical emergency in year 2 that exceeds the 5% that they let you do in the plan. You're like, oh my goodness, I just lost 10% on this investment. Or, what if you got the chance of a lifetime on an investment deal, on buying an office building or something like that? So sorry, you lose a lot of your flexibility. So loss of flexibility is a legitimate thing. The next part is we have higher taxes. What do we mean by higher taxes?
Yeah, so this one is a little surprising, right? So the way that annuities get pitched is because of tax-deferred growth, tax-deferred growth, tax-deferred growth, which gets people excited. Well, they never talk about the decumulation phase. They never talk about, what about when you actually want to spend the money? Because I don't know about you, Brian. The reason I save all this money is so that I can spend it one day, right? Yeah. Well, one thing with annuities is they're not taxed the same way that after-tax assets are. They don't get subjected to long-term capital gains rates. When you go to pull money out of your annuity, it's going to be ordinary income on the earnings.
Yeah, and typically, because remember, you're funding a lot of times you're funding these, if it's done right, with after-tax money. And so they're going to make you pull out the income component before you get to the principal. So you're going to pay ordinary income tax rates on all of it. And check this out. Losses are not deductible. So there's no ability to harvest losses. So we're primarily talking about, with that statement, variable annuities. Yep. So if you're buying these straight up investment products and they go down those bad years, you could have losses and they're not going to be deductible. You're not able to donate if you have appreciated holdings. Because that's when you're doing after-tax investing normally, you could use this if you're charitably minded. You can donate appreciated mutual funds, appreciated stocks, and you take a tax benefit. You get a full deduction for the market value, but you never pay income taxes on the capital gains.
Exactly.
That is a great planning tool if you are charitably minded. You can't do that with annuities.
That's right.
And then you'd also, Bo mentioned this earlier today, you don't, and this one's a big one. You invest, like Bo's talked about, you have a portfolio that you put in $500,000 into the portfolio. It's now worth 7 figures, like $1 million. Yep. You pass away, your heirs are going to get a step up in basis, meaning they're going to, that $500,000 investment now becomes after tax to $1 million for your beneficiaries because they got the step up in basis. Annuities don't get that. You have to pass this on to your children where somebody's got to pay the tax man the taxes on all those deferred gains.
And then the last, and we've already talked about this, just these quirky limitations, cap rates, participation rates, all these different things make investment annuities maybe not as attractive of a thing as they were when they originally pitched to you.
So I kind of want to bring this thing in for landing. I think it's important for anybody who's considering annuities because they do have a component. If somebody wanted to create a private pension, a fixed annuity might be something they want to look at. The investment side, it's a little different equation, but you ought to at least at a minimum educate yourself on the primary fee structures of all annuities. So we kind of want to give you a guide to understanding annuity fees in general.
And again, and I'm sorry, Brian, because this was team prep. We did another table with a chart, and so sorry.
It's just my ADHD that kicks in. Is we are running a virtual classroom here to a degree, and people need to know this information. But I like it when we get to kind of be goofy, silly, and make these things teachable. But I think it's so important that people it warrants a table.
Well, and I want you to rest assured, you've still been goofy. I want you to know you haven't lost that.
That's good.
So let's talk about some of the common fees and expenses that you see across annuity contracts. The first one are what they call insurance charges. These are what are known as M&E fees, mortality and expense fees. Remember, annuities most often are associated with some type of insurance. That's what makes them their insurance-based products. Well, these expenses, these mortality and expense costs, pay for the insurance guarantees associated with the product or the administrative expenses to actually design and run the product.
Yeah, to get that tax-deferred status, they have to be wrapped inside of an insurance product. So exactly right. But then they go on and talk about how when the investment, they're going to have some costs associated with that.
Yeah, so if you're participating in an equity indexed annuity or a variable annuity, there's going to be some underlying sub-account fee costs that you're paying. So those investment options have a fee that are with them. Well, here's what's really, really frustrating, Brian. You mentioned one time that you had a client, I still remember this, and they were so excited because they had a 401k plan but their 401k had Vanguard investment options, and they were so excited about those.
It was a dentist. She was very excited that they had Vanguard investments inside theirs. But when I looked at their 401k, I was like, these aren't true Vanguard investments. They are more like Frankenstein because they had sub-account fees. So all the low, because what is Vanguard known for is low cost.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden you go and look at the Vanguard S&P 500 and some of the other funds that are in there, and you realize they have internal expenses well over 1%. And it's like because the sub-account fees. So it's not uncommon. Those investment management fees are real. So you need to pay attention to that stuff.
The next one, surrender charges. We've already talked about this. When you buy an annuity, when you enter into one of these contracts, generally you lock your money up 5, 7, 10, 12, 15 years. If you want to get out of it, you're going to pay the price. So just be aware of what the surrender period is and what the surrender charge is. And even if you've made a mistake in the past, like, I want to get out of this, you guys have changed my mind. Sometimes we tell folks, hey, as much as we want to get you out of this thing, the surrender charge is just too great. We have to let time pass before we exit it.
Yeah, we'll get into it when we get to that flat contract fee. But it's not uncommon when somebody comes to us, a prospect comes to us with an annuity, we look at where they are in the cycle. Sometimes you have to love the one you're with because it is so detrimental to pay those surrender charges. If you've already been there for a few years, it makes sense to just kind of love the one you're with, which is unfortunate because it limits our planning ability in some ways. But we'd rather measure twice, cut once to do the right planning for the client and just let it be a teachable moment that they got sold a bad product.
The next one, rider fees. Again, these are optional riders. These benefits come with an additional cost. This could be cost of living protection or spousal addition or life insurance or, wear a blue shirt on Tuesday. Whatever the thing is, you can add just about anything you want, but it's going to cost money, and it's going to either increase the total cost of the product or decrease your overall return. So you need to be aware of what. And here's the other thing I think it's really, I don't want to say frustrating, but a lot of annuity salesmen, I feel like, will add riders without ever even talking to the client. Say, well, no, you need this one and this one. And, well, if you get disabled, you want the premiums to still be paid in the product, so we're going to add. Just make sure you understand what are all the costs associated with the product that you might be buying.
That's why variable annuities are hard to shop. When somebody shows up with a variable annuity and they want us to look at it, it's hard to know because every product is designed with additional riders added to them. So it's hard to do an apples to apples analysis when you take into account all the additional riders that are stacked on top of it.
Now, we don't like any fees. I think that's okay to say. We generally don't like fees, but the flat contract fee is interesting. This is a baseline charge that allows you to maintain ownership of the annuity. Now, sometimes, depending on the type of annuity product, if it's large enough, they'll waive this fee. Where we normally see flat contract fees, or if we're doing something like a rescue annuity.
Yeah, rescue annuities, there's some players out there in the insurance marketplace now that know that there's a whole broad group of people that have been sold some annuities that maybe long-term aren't great products. So what they've done is they've designed these rescue annuities where they're very low cost, but they will charge you a flat contract fee to help offset so the insurance charges are minuscule.
That's right.
That's how they make up the difference. And then we've had to do that for clients. So it is these things, you'll pay these fees just so you can not pay income taxes. Because what happens is if you have somebody who's had an annuity for 7, 10 years, they might have a pretty large gain built into it. And the only way you can get access to it is to pay a lot of income taxes. So you don't want to do that, and you don't want to trigger the taxability of it. So you'll do these rescue type annuities where you'll exchange it, do a like-kind exchange. You don't pay income taxes on the like-kind exchange, and then you love the one you're with a better designed product.
That's exactly right.
So let's kind of talk about, because how can you tell? Because a lot of you guys, we're now that we're hopefully getting out of the house in the next few weeks as we're ending this quarantine, you're probably going to come into your neighborhood financial planner that is going to try to sell you an insurance product. How do you know that don't get lured into the bad investment? What's some things that you can do to protect yourself?
Well, I think it's so interesting. We're doing a pre-show prep, and we're talking about and, we've been doing this for long enough. I remember back in the day when you could go sell one of these things, you get pitched on how much you make, but that was way back then. And we were talking, you're like, guys, no,
this hasn't stopped.
You're wrong.
Yeah, this hasn't stopped. Because we have, realize we have associates here that have worked on the commission side, and we called in one of them, and he goes, no, I think with the new fiduciary rules, they quit charging 8% commissions. I think they've pushed those down to like 3 or 4%. I said, no, that is not true. And I said, because I just got an email and I did a quick search. All you have to do is go into your email if you're a financial advisor, which is funny to me is because we're fiduciary financial advisors. It's not hard to see that we are not your typical firm where we're doing commissions, but these guys just throw everybody in the pot and shake it up and send out these emails. And here's an adage that you need to understand. The higher the commission on a product, probably the worse the product it is. Because we hear the adage, does it sell itself? If you have to put an 8% commission on a product, it definitely is not selling itself. It must mean it's ugly. It's got some warts on it, and you're lipsticking the heck out of that thing trying to make this product sell. So you have to go empower a sales force and pay them a lot of muku bucks to get them to push it. But here's an email I got. This came to me on April 1st. And maybe
this was not an April Fool's joke.
But look at the subject line, by the way, was what's in boldface right there. Don't miss out on a 10% bonus and an 8% commission opportunity. They're pushing insurance annuity type products, and this stuff's still going on. So we're not done with this.
Hey, look, I'm not picking on this company. I'm not even really familiar with this company. But this is what I think is so interesting. It doesn't talk a whole lot about the client. It's only talking to us as the advisor. Hey, here's what you get. Hey, here's what you get. Hey, here's what you get. It's not really talking about the client. If the products are designed to really benefit the person selling it, not the person buying it, immediate red flag.
So that's probably a great segue. Thanks for keeping me on track to signs you might be making a bad investment.
Sure. The first one is you don't understand the why the investment is a good fit for you. So I say this all the time to someone, Brian. If I recommend to you a strategy or an investment or a solution or a fill in the blank, and you couldn't go to your local grocery store and to the person standing 6 feet away from you, explain to them what I just explained to you, maybe you shouldn't buy it.
And it's one of those things when you're asking the question of, because you said why, and I like when people say the why, because as we've heard earlier in the show, a lot of times people's desires are in conflict. Because you will have people that say, the why might be, I want a guaranteed income stream for the rest of my life. But then when they find out, I can't pass it on to my kids. Those things are in conflict with each other. So you better make sure you understand the why and know if this is truly a good fit for you.
The next one, the investment is complex and you don't really know how it works. Again, the 6 foot grocery store example still works. If you can't explain how the product works to someone else, maybe you don't need to invest in that. We tell all of our clients all the time, if you don't understand what we're recommending, why we're recommending, and why it makes sense for you, ask us, and we'll try to tell it a different way. And ask us again, and we'll tell you a different way. Ask, because you really need to make sure you understand it. Don't ever just sign on the dotted line because, they have a nice suit and they seem like they know what they're talking about.
Well, we said this earlier in the show too, is that the sales brochure seems incredibly simple. Come to me, I'll give you this product that gives you this guaranteed performance for, and you're like, wow, that's so simple. That's what I'm looking for is a guaranteed performance. Take away the risk. But then they show up with, and Austin in our pre-show meeting, he's working the boards while Daniel's at home, also in the chat room, he goes, have you ever seen an insurance contract? It's like 130 pages.
It is.
So it's a very simple promise with a very complex back end. And that's where you have to be very careful on how you reconcile those two things.
The third sign that you might be making a bad investment, if there's a structure that doesn't make sense. And when we're talking about structure that doesn't make sense, what we're really talking about is, do you have an annuity inside of an IRA? Why would you be doing that? If there's not like a really, really esoteric, unique, specific purpose for doing that, probably is not what makes the most sense for you.
Well, and respect the foo. We talked about these type of products should, if you're looking at financial order of operation, where do they fall? Even if you're doing it right, it's after you've maxed out fully to the legal limit of what the IRS lets you do into your 401k, your 403b, your 457s, your IRAs. There should not be any tax-deferred boxes that have not been checked. That's where, so if somebody's coming to you and they know that you're only putting in to get the maximum match from your employer, but you haven't maxed out, and they're still recommending an annuity to you, that structure doesn't necessarily make sense.
And then the last one, and we laugh at this because we just seen bad advisors who do this. They tell you that insurance is the answer for everything.
And this is, I think back to my career. I've been doing this over 2 decades now, is that when I first started being a financial planner, and we use the analogy of it was a stool, is that you had the financial planner. We're kind of the quarterback for this whole process, but you got your CPA, you got your life insurance salesman, because people do need life insurance. I don't want to mitigate that. I mean, I have tons of life insurance. Yep. You have tons of life insurance. There is a need while you're still working and you need to replace that income. There might be a need for certain things. And then you'd have your estate attorney. So you'd have all these professionals that were kind of coordinated and working together. Well, then the insurance agents kind of realized, we don't like that guy being the quarterback. We'll just start selling everything. So that's when you saw insurance companies start buying mutual fund companies so that they could get creative with rolling these things up. So now you see insurance agents, they'll tell you, if you need to save for college, I've got the product for you. If you need to pay off your mortgage early, I've got an insurance product for you. I mean, there's all kind of things that instead of, and this is one of the things when I worked in financial planning at the first firm, we sold a lot of insurance, and it used to bother me that we go sell these products that, yes, we'd go put 5 hours in and then have a huge commission check. And I was like, man, we could do the exact same thing if we put them in touch with an estate planning attorney that structured a trust that gave the same protection and save them a lot of money on that insurance premium that they're paying. But it was just different. And that's why I'm telling you that it's the same way why you still want that stool approach. You still want to have a good attorney, an estate attorney. You want to have a good CPA once your assets get to a certain level. But you also want to have a financial planner that kind of can coordinate all those things and bring in that insurance agent, because we still do a lot of insurance. It's just that when you think you have a one-size-fit-all, you get in some gray area there.
You know, at the end of the day, when we said this to start with, we'll repeat it again. Annuities aren't inherently a bad thing. Insurance products aren't inherently a bad thing. Unfortunately, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to us during our live stream, the chat has just been wonderful. I mean, the people are saying, oh, well, yeah, the reason advisors pitch those is because they are so profitable and they get paid the most. And so it's really, unfortunately, it's kind of true. We just want you guys to be well aware and well equipped that when someone does approach you with this, you can say, okay, yes, this does make sense for me, or no, this does not make sense for me, and this is why. And send the insurance salesman a link to this show, and we'd be happy to explain it to him.
Well, our like status on this show is probably going to be substantially lower than the channel average, right? I just can go ahead and see how the thumbs downs that are going to be pushed. We'll probably, the insurance guys will be rolling in here in no time. But guys, seriously, go to our website, moneyguy.com. Love for you to sign up for the resource page. I mean, that's something that's very powerful. A lot of people are taking advantage of that. All we ask for is your email address, and then we load you up with free advice. And that's all part of the abundance cycle.
That's right.
We've been talking about this, that we have been creating content since 2006, creating an online platform where you come, learn, apply, grow, and it's free. You're like, holy cow, these guys are literally just giving this away. What is the catch? Because you heard today, when we're talking about investing, when we're talking about planning, there's usually a catch when somebody's giving you something. Well, the catch for us is we do have an objective that lies underneath the abundance cycle, is that when you reach a level of success, you're going to get to it. We want you to come learn, apply, grow, but you're going to reach a level that you just don't feel comfortable. You've had so much success. Your assets have reached such a level that you're like, I need a co-pilot. I need somebody to help me make decisions. You'll remember who helped you build that foundation, and you'll come and we'll work together professionally as well, because we work with clients all across the country.
You guys mentioned at the beginning, we've crossed over 60,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is so thanks to you guys. If you are out there listening and you're just renting your seat to this show, go ahead and take some ownership. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Click the bell so you get notifications. As we have new information coming out, you will be notified. Make sure that you do that.
Yeah. Join the family. Quit coming to the buffet dinners and eating the food without actually joining the family. If you're showing up, don't rent your seat, as Bo said. I want you to subscribe and ring the bell for good service so that you can also get the notifications. Guys, we're having a blast. Money Guy team, out.